Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the seminar on young views on today's China. Let me, on behalf of the Centre d'Estudis de Temes Contemporanis and Institut Barcelona d'Estudis Internacionals, thank you for joining us and also welcoming you to this session. I'm Pablo Pareja. I'm Associate Professor in International Relations here at IBEI and the University Pompeu Fabra, and I'm very glad to be moderating this seminar, for which we have invited three young researchers, three young individuals who have different views on today's China. The seminar that we are celebrating this morning is part of a larger project in which the Centre d'Estudis de Temes Contemporanis, with his director, Pere Almeida, and his team, have been working with IBEI, with the Barcelona Institute of International Studies, on contemporary China. You may have seen in the IDEES magazine, in the journal, that they have released a number of articles on today China, and the seminar that we are celebrating today is part of that larger project that aims at informing and inviting to a discussion on some of the prevalent and challenges that China is facing, not only today, but also in the coming future. Let me very briefly introduce you to how this session is going to operate. Most of you are following the session through YouTube, but the idea is for this to be as interactive as possible. I will immediately introduce the three people that have kindly accepted to be part of this seminar. I will hand the floor to each of them for them to introduce themselves and briefly share their views on today's China. They will let us know what their experiences are, what their expectations, and what their views are on different issues. Following that first part, I will ask them some questions for them to engage with, and then we will save the latest part of the session to address the questions of the audiences, the remarks, the comments, the observations that you would like to raise. So let me invite you now to write your questions, issues, doubts in the chat that is available for you. I will be collecting these questions at the end of the session, and I will share them with the participants so that they can address most of them or all of them if we have that opportunity. So without further ado, and thanking you again for joining us this morning, let me briefly introduce the three people that we have with us. We have, first of all, Meijie Jiang. Meijie Jiang is a Chinese student who was born and raised in China. She's currently in China, but she's completing her PhD at the doctoral program in law at the University Pompeu Fabra. She's working on the relations between China and Latin America. So she not only has a very deep understanding of domestic affairs in China, but also a very wide knowledge of China's interactions with the rest of the world. Second, we have Joan Vicenz, who's also living in China. In contrast to Meijie, Joan was born here at home in Catalonia, but he's been living in China for a number of years now. So she has an alternative approach to the country, and she has a wide expertise working and living there. And then last but not least, we have Chia. Chia is replacing Chao Zhang. Chao Zhang was meant to join us this morning, but due to a last-minute change in his agenda, he's been appointed a different position in the Chinese government, and he had to take office this morning. So we've been blessed with the generosity of Chia. Chia is a Taiwanese student currently completing the master program here at IBEI, in the Barcelona Institute of International Affairs. She was born and raised in Taiwan, and she's currently in Barcelona. You can imagine that having a person that was born in Taiwan might seem a bit controversial, but we thought that it might be a good addition to this debate because she has an interesting approach to China from the other side of the Straits. So without further ado, let me hand the floor first to Meijie, and let me also warn all of you that the three of them, of course, are participating on their own account. That means that they are not representing the views of the institutions that they work with or where they study at, which hopefully this will give them more room for maneuver. And without further ado, let me hand the floor to Meijie. Meijie, good morning, good afternoon, good afternoon, good evening in China. The floor is all yours. Whenever you're ready, we'll be glad to hear about your views and your experiences in China. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Okay, first of all, thank you very much. Thank you, Pablo, and thank you for having me in this talk. I think it's very meaningful. And yeah, good morning to people in Barcelona. And because here is it's afternoon, so good morning to people in Barcelona. My name is Meijie. I'm from China. My hometown is in the central China. The name is Zhengzhou. Well, currently I'm a PhD candidate at the Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona. I'm also a researcher in the international law and the international relations research group. Well, my thesis is about institutions on China-Latin American economic relations. In the past second semester, I taught the subject of foreign relations and geopolitics in Asia Pacific. A brief introduction for my education background. I received my bachelor degree from the Sun Yat-sen University. It's a Chinese university. It's in the south of China. And it's where I am now because I'm doing a research stay here. Well, I got my master's degree in Latin American international relations from King Juan Carlos University. And apart from that education background, I have several years working experience. I worked for a Chinese engineering and construction company. So I participated in many international bidding overseas projects. And I have also been to Latin America, mainly in Mexico, in Mexico City. So in the past 10 years of my life, I have traveled a lot. Basically 4 or 5 years, I was outside of China, in Spain, mainly most of the time in Europe, and then in Mexico, in Latin America, in Mexico City, like almost 1 year. So, and the other half of 10 years, another 5 or 6 years, I was in China, mainly in Beijing, and some other cities like Shanghai. So that's basically my story. And well, recently I have published 2 papers. One is about network analysis of China's role and function in norm shaping, and the other one is on the IDEES journal titled "Chinese Relations with the Global South: Evidences from Latin America." Well, I have a research interest quite wide range, like international relations, foreign policy, discourse, medium. But most of the related to China. Well, like many of you, I'm also very interested and curious about how to understand China, Chinese history, culture, thoughts, tradition, as well as the economic growth and today's role in the international community. So although I'm a native Chinese, I won't say I know every aspect of China because it's a huge country. It's a huge population, 1.4 billion people. So, and also it's very large because many cities and many provinces I haven't been to either. But I'm glad that we can have today's talk, and I'm waiting to share with you my thoughts, my views. Yeah, that's all. That's basically my story and my brief introduction. Pablo.
Having a problem with the audio. Yep. Let me hand the floor to Joan now. Joan, whenever you're ready, we're all ears. Looking forward to hearing from you. Go ahead.
Good morning, Barcelona. Thank you very much to IBEI and to the Centre d'Estudis de Temes Contemporanis for organizing this event. Special thanks to you, Pablo, for inviting me. In 2014, when I first moved to Hong Kong, Pablo patiently supervised my MA thesis. I thought back then that I would pursue a PhD. Then life happened and I didn't. I have been living and working both in mainland China and Hong Kong ever since. In fact, I lived in Kaifeng, which is 60-70 kilometers away from Zhengzhou, where Meijie was born and raised. And yeah, even though I have been orbiting around academia, I have always looked it from the outside in. So here comes my disclaimer. My understanding of China in the world tries to be holistic, but perhaps fails to be as systematic as a scholar's approach would be. I feel like I'm mainly a witness in many ways. So if you allow me, that is the way in which I'd like to address you today, as a witness of, as instructed by Pablo, changes in China. I'd like to focus on personal anecdotes, on ideas that I've seen floating around in everyday in media or in everyday conversations. And these, perhaps subjectively or in a biased way, have come to confirm my understanding of China, and I take these ideas as potential symptoms. So I would like to discuss 3 changes that I have observed, followed by a general comment about Chinese politics. So the first point I would like to make has to do with demography. A few years back, when I was living in mainland China, the one-child policy was relaxed. I thought that the measure would be received with excitement, but most of my coworkers weren't too happy about it. Why? If I had to sum it up, I'd say that having kids was becoming more and more expensive for them. I'd say that when they only needed to have 1 kid, it was easier for them to be a good citizen. Now, to behave like good citizens, having a second baby would be understood as a duty. They'd be facing pressure from family or from society. Employers as well wouldn't hesitate to ask about their plans for motherhood, for instance. The burden, therefore, shifted from the government onto the families, first and foremost onto the women, and sometimes even towards the private sector. That is to say, the tension used to be between the government and families. Now it's between the families, particularly women, and their employers. The second point I would like to discuss in this introduction has to do with pollution and energy transition. I believe it was during my Christmas holidays in 2015 that I was in Beijing with some friends. The air that day was so thick, so gray, that you couldn't even see across the road. They called it the airpocalypse. So ever since, the situation has changed. Industrial policies seem to be moving heavy industry away from densely populated areas, and the government seems to be stepping up its game in terms of energy transition. Now, is China going green, or is it simply hiding things under the rug? The solution proposed by the party seems to be hardly innovative: sustainability via the market. One of my first professors of international relations used to say that the term sustainable development was an oxymoron. Can then an innovation in a one-party state prove her wrong? I think that the jury is still out. As an example, in 2016, during a trip in Gansu province, when I was crossing the Gobi Desert, in a second-class train, I was shocked to see how you could find both massive, endless coal plants, but at the same time, you could also find the largest wind farms you could possibly imagine. Now, the last point I would like to make is about innovation. In 2014, I attended a talk in Hong Kong by an American professor who had just published a book about innovation in China. The question he wanted to ask back then was roughly, can China innovate? His middle-of-the-road thesis was that China had been innovating all along, because companies had been finding new ways to produce stuff at a very low cost in ways that would have been impossible elsewhere. Had he been writing his book in 2021, his response, I believe, would have been quite different. The rollout of 5G is the paramount example of that. This rollout is much slower outside of China because Huawei has most of the patents on 5G technology. But now we can discuss drones, autonomous vehicles, etc., which are further examples of this trend. So In this regard, the new questions I'd like to ask are, can the People's Republic of China be innovative enough? Or, for instance, how will this innovation be used? Now, if I still have 1 more minute, I'd like to finish with this general comment about politics and grand strategy. Since I moved to China 2014, I've already seen 3 major shifts in the party's grand strategy. First, it was the China dream. It came and went. 6-7 years ago, it was everywhere. It was so obnoxiously omnipresent that I ended up reading it, perhaps cynically, as the type of sign that you have at the airport or in public infrastructure undergoing renovation. Like, please bear with us, we are improving the facilities. In my opinion, that was the real meaning of the China dream. The government was saying, the journey is long, we know that what we are doing, trust us, please be patient. Then it was the Belt and Road, which was nothing new. A new repackaging for something that was already occurring. I think there is a lot of analysis to be conducted on the Belt and Road, but my hunch is that last year, when COVID-19 became a global threat, the party saw it as a huge potential burden. What happens if every country defaults on their debts at the same time? So now we have the double circulation, a solution to a new problem, or again, perhaps something that was already happening. The circulation is a push towards strengthening the local markets and for a certain level of economic self-reliance. But again, the appeal of the government to the citizens to drive growth through domestic consumption is hardly a new idea. My question then, and I would like to end here, is this propaganda intended for a domestic audience or for a global audience? My hypothesis is that the China Dream, the Belt and Road, or dual circulation, are slogans that are intended not entirely but largely for domestic audiences. The follow-up questions would be then, are we, the foreigners, Laowais, reading too much into it? Are we taking the propaganda at face value? Or even are we perhaps projecting our own anxieties onto China? Of course, even though my response would be not entirely, I do think that there is a key important element of that. And that's the end of my introduction. I guess I overextended my time.
Thank you very much, Joan. No problem at all. Thank you very much for that insight on some of the challenges that China is facing today. Let's now move to the third of our participants. Chia, as I said at the beginning, she's Taiwanese, but she's the only one of the 3 who's currently living in Barcelona. Chia, whenever you are ready, we are all ears, looking forward to hearing from your experiences, your views, your expectations about today's China. The floor is all yours. And again, thank you for joining us this morning.
And hi, everyone. Good morning. So thank you, Pablo, for inviting me. It's really a surprise. So I need a disclaimer here also, because since I'm from Taiwan, so I would say my understanding of China could be very limited. And so let me introduce myself a bit before my presentation. So I used to be a business journalist for around 4 or 5 years before I came to Europe for my master's studies. And I used to cover business news, not just in Taiwan, but also from the perspective of Hong Kong and China. So I'm very into the political economy issues about China and how China interacts with other countries as well. So today I'm gonna share my screen because I actually prepare several slides for today's presentation. Sorry, let me open this. Okay. Can you see my screen right now? Okay.
I cannot, but let's hold on 1 second and see whether you can share it. Can you try again? Hopefully now it will work.
Now, how about now? Can you see the slides? The Tangping generation.
I don't think we can now. Have you pressed the share screen and then?
Yes, but it looks not so promising. But anyway, I think I would just start so that we can save some time.
And then whenever we can process the presentation. Thanks, Gia.
Yeah. So I would maybe I would upload the slides later. So honestly, it's really just my personal views since I'm not a China expert. But recently, I've been reading some articles on a recent social phenomenon in China, and it's called Tangping. So it actually just means lie down, lying flat. So basically, I want to talk about Tangping generation and what can we see in today's China behind this phenomenon. So what is Tangping? So according to one of the interviews BBC made to the Chinese youngster, lying flat is actually seen as a wise movement because they said only by lying down can humans become the majors of all things. So what exactly is Tangping? It means that now Chinese youngsters, they say no to have kids. So they say no to buying a house, buying a property, buying a car, and then they just do nothing. So basically it means Tangping, just lying down. And then, so when I first know about this concept, I quickly, link this with a shrinking labor markets and a crazy long working hour in China. So basically in East Asia, not just China, actually, like we all suffering from very, very long working hours. But in China, I think the situation is a little bit crazy because they are famous for the 996, the 996 working hour system. It means that you start working at 9 in the morning and then finish your work at 9 and at 9 in the night, and you work for 6 days a week. So when I first came across this concept, I thought, okay, maybe this is gonna just be like, people are saying no to the whole labor market because the workload is just too heavy. But I started to do some research on, all these material conditions and some possible factors behind Tangping. So first of all, I think Joanne just one. Sorry, I forgot your name. Just mentioned the China's birth policy. So even though the Chinese government is easing its birth policy, so from the very beginning they are only allowed to have 1 kid. Now they can have 3 kids, but the birth rate is still not improving. And also we can see that the gap between China's rural and urban youth is still there. So it's a very the wealth distribution, also the resource distribution is still very unfair in China, which means that if you're from a 2nd or even 3rd tier Chinese city, the only opportunity for you to change your life is to go to big cities like Beijing, Shanghai, or Shenzhen. But even that, you still cannot afford to buy the house or to have your own family or to raise your own kids. So the situation is still there. And also, this is just my hypothesis, but I believe that Tangping, this pessimistic, this passive attitude toward the future also says something about the limited political rights in China. So we can see that, okay, from the 1980s, we already witnessed the failure of the political reforms. Actually, today is 4th of June, I just told Pablo, which is a very special day for China too. And also in recent years, we also see that the failure of the social movements in Hong Kong. So I think that somehow explains the reason why China's younger generation could be very pessimistic about the future, because basically they don't have much right to express their opinions. And actually Tangping, even it sounds like a very, very neutral term, like it's not so politically sensitive, but the Chinese government is now censoring this word on the internet because they believe that this should have some negative impact on younger generation. like people would be more reluctant to work if they, allow this opinion to spread on the internet. So yeah, as I said, I actually don't know that much about China. So I'm very happy to be here, and I would also be happy to hear any comments from you. So I actually just found a photo about Jinping. So I will try to fix the technical issues right now. So if it's possible, I'm gonna share you later. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Pierre. And the three of you have addressed different issues about the environment, the climate change, crisis, demographics, the role of the internet, the changing habits of the Chinese society. Let me now move to the second part of this seminar. Hopefully some of your remarks will spark the debate. So of course, feel free to comment on what your colleagues have raised during the presentation when I give you the floor right now. But in order to open up the conversation, let me start by asking the three of you, and you can answer in any order you prefer, a question about your own perceptions and your own experiences as young people living or having lived in China with a particular approach to China, which is that how prevalent or how present is the debate about China in your conversations with friends, family, colleagues? Let me put it differently. Is it a topic that you very commonly discuss, or is it not a topic at all in your conversation? And if it is, what would you say are the prevailing concerns or issues or aspects that your colleagues, friends, family, and everyone else around you likes to discuss? So in any given order, I'll give you the floor. Just open your mic, and I'll definitely hand the floor to you. So any of the three of you. Meijie, shall we, so that make it easy, shall we start with you? Let's start with Meijie, since she's among the three, the one who has lived for a longer time in China, and probably the one that has more Chinese friends and relatives. Whenever you're ready, Meijie, go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, that's right. I have lived in China like almost 25 years. Yeah. So I think before answering your question, I would like to say that, well, this is related to my personal experience. So I don't know how much people I can represent, but it's my own experience and my personal thoughts. And first of all, I would like to say something. Like, I mean, 15 years ago, like when I was a teenager, I think most Chinese people admired the West, the US, the European country, because they have cutting edge technology. People there have big house, big cars. And that was what we knew from news, from TV programs, and from movies. So actually, in that period, I think China was catching up with the developed countries. And now I think after years of economic growth, and we found that even China has different political and economic system, we can develop, we can have better life, and we can have cutting edge technology. And especially after the pandemic, we witnessed how Chinese government unite the whole society, and how the government mobilizes the resources. And they always put people's life as the first place. So I think for me and for many people who I know, and I think we have confidence in the society and in China and also in our life. So then back to your question, and what are the main topic in our daily life? Well, sorry, I forgot the girl's name. It's Kia? Kia, is that right? Yeah, Kia mentioned the topic.
No, Jiang.
Sorry,
Jiang.
Jiang.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Jiang. Yeah, Jiang mentioned a concept at Jinping. Yes, that's a very hot topic in the cyberspace. It means that Chinese young people have to face pressure and like the long working hours, and also have pressure from family, pressure from like high housing prices and high cost. Yeah, that's a topic in the cyberspace. But if you go to the real life, if you speak with the people around you, that might be, well, that's a topic in our life, but that's not the main issue. For example, we know it's very hard to find a job. We know there's a very high housing price, and the living cost is very high. But we believe that through our hard working, we can make it. Yeah, we not everyone should go to Beijing and Shanghai. We can develop in other cities. So we can, after years of work, we can have a job, we can have a family, and we can have family and we can raise children. So I think it's one thing is some topic in the cyberspace, and the other thing is reality. We know we have problems, but the problems are common in every country. So that's why I have confidence in myself and also confidence in China, because I think we have the knowledge, and also we have the encouragement to change our life. And that's how our life has changed in the past 4 decades. Because if you know, like 4 decades ago, everyone are very poor, Chinese family are very poor. But now, if you go to the most of Chinese coastal China, the big cities, you could see the very good infrastructure, and people have a good life and even better life than many Western countries. So I know it's very hard, but I think we can to reach that situation for the people in other places. And the second thing is, what are the topics among my friends and my colleagues? Like, it's very personal. Like, for example, if you are a researcher or if you are a young professor in university, we're worried about the publications or worried about the articles. You said that the working hour is like 996, but for a young researcher and young professors, it's almost 007. It means almost from day to night and 7 days. So I think it's a typical thing for the scholars all over the world. It's not just in China, but I know in China we faced a lot of pressure. This is one thing, and the other thing is you just mentioned like third child policy. Yes, that's right. Yes, because I think now the problem is young couples are encouraged to have babies, but usually young couples don't have time or money to have 3 children. And I think this situation might be worse to women. Why? Because the time for having babies is exactly the golden time for career. So it's kind of a dilemma in this. So I think the next step for the government and for the society is to try to find a way to balance the population growth and the women's rights. So yes, that's the second issue. And the third issue, I think, among the society is like, I think in the past 4 decades, the main purpose is to try to make the economic cake bigger. That's meant to accumulate the wealth, the whole wealth. And the next stage, I think, is the problem of distribution. That distribution of the societal wealth among population, not only the coast of China, because 4 years ago, they come up with like some people become rich first, or like some regions prosper first, and then the advanced regions and the rich people can help the backward cities and can help the middle cities, the cities, provinces in the middle and Western China. So I think the next stage is to try to bridge the gap between cities and rural areas bridge the gap between the coastal China and the middle and the western China, and also to bridge the gap between the rich population and the still vulnerable group. So I think that's the three main topic in my daily life or in the life of the people around me. Yes.
Meijie, you made reference to some of the ideas that Pierre mentioned in her presentation. So I think it seems logical that we now move to Pierre, and then I'll hand you the floor to Pierre. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Thank you, Pablo. So I'm also just sharing my personal views. And so I have a group of Chinese friends, but I think I will start with my Taiwanese friends first. So yeah, of course, China is always a hot topic for my friends and me, because actually I think Taiwan's younger generation, we are very into politics, because we are the first generation who were born at a time when Taiwan is already a democratic country. So we for us, it's just very natural to talk about politics. And to be honest, no offense, but I think to most of my friends, China is usually described as a threat to our island country, which is always threatening us, it's going to be a risk to our autonomy and democracy. So yeah, it's always a very sensitive topic. I mean, for my Taiwanese friends, not, but maybe if we are also talking to our Chinese friends, the conversation would be a little bit embarrassing. But I do have some Chinese friends, and surprisingly, I know that they also have a very complicated feelings for China. So for example, one of my close friends, he's originally from Guangzhou, and now he's in Europe, but he told me that he's not gonna go back to China anymore because he was doing some LGBT rights movements in China. So he is now already on the list. So I would say, unfortunately, like when we talk about China, now how we frame the issues, usually that comes with very a little bit negative perspectives. But I would say, even for Taiwanese, we also very closely observing the democratic reforms. I mean, if it's possible in China, because as I just mentioned, today is 4th of June. So I don't know how many people are still remembering what happened 32 years ago, but I think it is for me, like a really outsider. I feel like political reforms in China is actually a very important topic, not just for Chinese, but also for Taiwanese and even all the other Asian countries. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Pierre. As you can see, this is a very animated conversation. Let's now move to Joan. Any thoughts or ideas that you'd like to share regarding the question on how prevalent China is in your conversations with friends and colleagues in China, and whether main issues or the main concerns are regarding the situation of the country? Joan?
Thank you very much. Yes, in fact, I would like to go a step backwards and start about our conversations growing up in Spain, where China was never part of the conversation. That changed, obviously, when I did the master's degree in China Studies. Then with my group of classmates, we still, to this day, we keep in touch and we discuss every single detail about Chinese society, politics, etc. But in Spain, I would say that China entered the mainstream mostly last year because of coronavirus, because of the wrong reasons. So I hope that, generally speaking, in the future, we can move towards having more informed conversations about China in Spain. When it comes to China, my experience was basically in Kaifeng, but also traveling around the country. Over there, it depends on what you mean when we discuss China? If we mean political conversations, I think that depends on the degree of trust that the other person has on you. Of course, if you barge in a room and start discussing politics, they will basically shut off, like there's not going to be a conversation. But over time, once you get when people get comfortable around you, they open up and you hear a lot of interesting stuff. A few months back, when Clubhouse went mainstream and everyone was thinking, wow, this could be the way to break the firewall. Well, you can have this kind of conversations. At least you could a few years back in the mainland with friends who would openly, at least in Petit Comité, openly criticize the government and injustices in society. In Hong Kong, well, the things in Hong Kong are a bit different. I think that before 2019, at least that's my personal experience. Before 2019, it was easier to discuss anything that had to do with China. During 2019, after 2019, my personal experience is that sometimes we don't want to talk about certain things because sometimes they hurt. Sometimes, I mean, people involved have certain connections, and you don't always want to end up having painful conversations. So there's a lot of trauma involved, and perhaps that's certain things are better not to be reminded like on a daily basis. And that's basically my response to your question. If I can also add a few things regarding what both Char and Meijie have said. Regarding LGBTQ issues, your comments, Char, made me think of Petrus Liu, who's I think he's either Hong Kongese or Taiwanese, but basically his thesis mentions that the way in which LGBTQ issues have become part of the mainstream, both in Taiwan and Hong Kong, is through the market. So because the LGBT community could be a customer, it was easier to cater for their needs. Now, my question to the mainland is this happening there? Will this happen there? Will it happen in the same way? Or, and this is a question to all of you, do you think that's unlikely? And yes, finally, the last thing I should mention, since today is the day that it is, talking about changes, of course, 2 years ago, we could go to the so far last vigil for Tiananmen here in Hong Kong, something that didn't happen last year, largely, I would say, due to coronavirus, and is not happening today either.
Yep. Thank you very much, Joan. Now let's move you. Some of you mentioned gender issues in your answers, so let me now move to another very important aspect that is not only specific to the situation of China, but a much more wider global trend, which is the changing position, the changing roles of women in modern societies. Let me ask you, have you noticed or have you experienced a significant change in recent years regarding the role of women and the way the country approaches gender issues? You've touched upon LGBTQ plus issues. You've also mentioned gender. So if that's okay, we can start now in the reverse way. So Joan, in your own experience, has this changed over the last few years, or you don't seem to notice a much more significant alteration in the role of women or the gender debates in society?
I think there are changes, and I wouldn't say that all the changes are positive. I would say that generally speaking, let's say here in Hong Kong, it's very easy to find women holding like general manager positions. Like in certain ways, I guess the glass ceiling has been shattered in certain ways, and I don't know. In the mainland, I think that there's a little bit of everything. In my experience in Kaifeng again, I saw that certain long-lasting trends, certain attitudes from professional men versus professional women were perhaps not keeping the standards that should probably be demanded from them, especially for those who were in positions of a certain relative power. Having said that, yes, I have many colleagues, many friends who were outspoken, were complaining about their families, telling them that they should get married by the time they turn 25. They were saying out loud that they wouldn't have kids. Some of them came out basically to their parents, which unfortunately for the people I know was a big thing, and the parents took a very long time to come to terms with. So I guess you can see both. Potentially good things might be happening, but again, even at the higher echelons of the political level, when you see the Politburo Standing Committee, it's still formed by 9, generally speaking, 60 to 70-year-old men.
Thanks, Joan. Let's now move to Chair. Chair, do you want to comment on the issue of gender? You touched upon it when you were talking about the experience of one of your friends who's now living in Europe, but would you like to address this issue in further length?
Yeah, I mean, it's just as far as I know, my understanding could be limited as well. But I heard that like the working conditions, I mean, you know, if it's about labor markets, I think women's conditions are already improved a lot in recent years. But when it comes to, you know, more progressive issues like LGBTQ, it's still kind of like a taboo in China, because I heard that, you know, some authors, they're not doing anything too, you know, radical. Basically, they just write some, you know, boy love stories, but they were sentenced to prison. So I think from the perspective of the Chinese government, it's still really like a taboo. So yeah, that's what I know. And I want to add one comment on Clubhouse, because I don't know if the Chinese government still allow Clubhouse to be used in China. I don't know. I'm not really sure. But I remember when it became popular in the beginning, I saw that, you know, the communication there like was very healthy, because I also see that, you know, in a room like there are Taiwanese, Chinese, Hong Kongers, and even some other Asians, and then, you know, everyone can really sit in a room virtually to talk about politics. And I think the atmosphere is very healthy, but I don't know what's the situation right now. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, now, Meijie, this is your turn. As a woman who's lived in China for nearly 25 years, has your life changed significantly? Do you see transformation in the role of women and gender issues in the Chinese societies?
Yeah, I mean, John mentioned the women in the political sphere, so I would like to talk about the women in education, because I think I'm much more familiar with this area. I think for me, I have many female friends. They are very smart, hardworking, and they have contributed a lot to the society. And you can see many very smart girls in classes in almost every subjects, in social science, in engineering, and in like natural sciences. They are very good at starting and innovation. Well, for me, I think one child policy, if you say that there's one positive aspect of one-child policy is they kind of ensure the education right for girls. So I think that's one of the positive aspect of one-child policy. But as I said before, there are also more we can do to improve women's rights. For example, I said how to guarantee women's rights in labor market, because if now people are allowed to have third child, the companies are not willing to hire women. So I think it's one of the issue and one of the problem. The government and society need to work on that. So I, as a woman, I also need. I'm looking forward to a society that is more tolerable for both gender, and I hope more women can play larger roles in every aspect of the societies. Yes, that's my simple answer.
Thank you very much, Meijie. Before we address the questions that the audience is now raising, and they're being very, very active, but let me encourage them also to raise any other questions that they may have. Let me ask you one last question to the three of you, which has to do with young approaches to two specific aspects. One is young approaches to human rights, and particularly the freedom of expression. I'd like to know your views about how free you feel to express your views while in China or about China. And at the same time, I'd like to ask you about your perceptions about the climate emergency or the climate crisis. How constant or how common is the debate among your friends, colleagues, and classmates regarding the environmental policies, the future of the planet, green issues? So I'd like to know your views about these two topics, and then I will address to you the different questions that the audience is now writing in the chat. Let's now take the different orders, so if that's okay with you all. We'll start now with Jiang, then we'll continue with Meijie, and then Joan. Jiang, whenever you're ready, freedom of expression and the climate crisis and the perceptions of the younger generations on these two topics and the particular position of China. Whenever you're ready.
I think, from my understanding, maybe I can talk a little bit more about human rights, because actually I have a friend. So in Taiwan, we actually have several NGOs. They are working on human rights in China. And then I would say maybe it's because of the change, in leadership style in China right now. So I remember she told me that several years ago, they are still allowed to, all these activists, they are still allowed to visit Hong Kong or even China to work on some human rights issues. But now the channels, the communication is kind of like blocked. So, from the perspective of Taiwan, we are trying to, some people are trying to do something to help improve the human rights issue, because I think for us, it's also kind of like universal issue. It's not just about, Taiwan and China. For us, it's like what's happening in our neighboring countries. So we need to work on that. But now, also we used to have a good connection with the NGOs in Hong Kong. But now, like as the two other speakers just mentioned, I think Hong Kong's situation is not so optimistic right now. When we talk about human rights and all these reforms, so yeah, like as far as I know, I think the situation is not very optimistic in terms of human rights. But if we talk about poverty reduction, there might be another issue. I'm just talking about more like political rights.
Thank you very much, Chair. Meijie, your views on this?
Yeah, well, I think for my understanding, I think actually, we have different understanding of democracy and human rights. And this is what I learned from the past 10 years and from my study. Why? Because all we talk about like human rights, the democracy, this area are shaped and are dominated by the West. So the West set a standard and say, oh, this is democracy and that is not. This is human rights and that is not. Well, actually, I found out that everyone can interpret and everyone can have their own understanding of what is human rights and what is democracy. For example, I spoke in a seminar 2 days ago about the right to development. It's on the climate change, climate governance, and I said for many emerging economies and for many developing countries, for them, the right to carbon emission is kind of right to development. And that right to development is also a human rights. So that's another understanding of human rights. And the second thing I want to say about human rights is basically, for me, like what is human rights? The basic right is a right to life, okay? We can live in the world, we can live without fear. So we can live our life is free of coronavirus. Our life is free of the external threats. So that's what I understand, because when coronavirus hit China first and then hit the whole world, I think Chinese government show Chinese people that they put life at the first. So the right to life is guaranteed in Chinese society. I think it's for most of Chinese is a fact. So that's the basic right to life. And the second is a right to property. It means when I go out, I'm not afraid that someone stole me. Okay, it's a basic right. I think we need to have in our life. So I think for everyone, we can have different understanding of what is human rights. And back to the democracy, that maybe it's a stranger to many of the people, because there is democracy in Chinese value. Because 100 years ago, science and democracy were borrowed from the West, and they led to Chinese reform and revolution. And today, we have kind of 12 socialism core values. Well, I don't remember them all, but it's kind of like harmony, integrity, equity, things like that. But we also have democracy and freedom. But many people ignore that because they think there is only one standard, that is Western standard. There is only, that's the golden standard. So if you cannot meet that standard, you are not a democratic country and you don't have human rights. But I think the scope and the meaning and how we reach, how we achieve democracy and how we guarantee people's human rights is quite different. So I think for me, monopolizing the understanding of democracy is not democratic at all. So also I also represented a proposal in the seminar, and I said there is a cognitive differences on the democratic international relations. Because why? For Western understanding, the democratic international relations is kind of make more countries like Western-like countries, like to have the free election and have the totally dominated by the market, that kind of free market. But for Chinese understanding and non-Western understanding, the democratic international relations is kind of involve more countries with different economic and political system in the decision making, in the non-making. So that's a different understanding, and we need to respect the different understanding, and we need to tolerate the differences in understanding what is human rights and what is democracy. That's my understanding. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Meijie. That makes for a very interesting debate. I think now it's Joan's turn.
Thank you very much. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about sustainability, but I would do it from the private sector, from the perspective of the private sector, because youth will come into the argument later. I think that both in Hong Kong and in the mainland, generally speaking, they feel like they need to catch up. They are lagging behind in terms of sustainability, recycling, and all these things. But things seem to be changing. I think it was in 2017 the party banned importing waste from other countries. I think that's a step in the right direction. But they are also stepping up their game when it comes to treating like hazardous industrial residues. New plants under construction, they keep the standards at least to the same level of the EU. So these things are happening, but they are not happening in a vacuum. When you talk to anyone from the private sector right now, everyone says that our stakeholders, our customers are driving the change. So young people, younger generations want management to behave in a different way. And everyone is saying that, especially since the beginning of 2020, this is a very, very sharp change. So I would say that younger generations, both in the mainland and in Hong Kong, are pushing for a radical change in terms of the approach to sustainability. Yeah, in terms of freedom of expression, let me talk about Hong Kong, like one of the elephants in the room. I think that in Hong Kong there are two clashes, or one clash, I would say, about the future. So both these societies or ideas or ideologies that Meijie was discussing seem to be clashing. On the one hand, there is a proposal by the Chinese Communist Party that believes in a future, their future. I shouldn't have used there, but a future. And at the same time, here in Hong Kong, especially since 1984, since the declaration, since the agreement between the British and Deng Xiaoping, mainly the narrative is, with you, there is no future. So I think that second narrative has a lot to do with things that are happening abroad, with understandings, the understandings of human rights, democracy that Meijie was discussing a bit ago. And now these two things, these two ideas are clashing. Now, is there a future for Hong Kong? I think that one of the problems, I would say, that everyone basically sleepwalked into 2 years ago is that everyone seems to think they know what the future holds, but the future sometimes is surprising. The surprise I wanted to mention to make this argument is, for instance, if the new future, is that there is going to be a new Cold War, for example, perhaps if China ends up losing friends and there's a bipolar order, perhaps Hong Kong could retain or regain its previous role. That is already happening in one simple but very crucial way. Many companies, many Chinese companies listed in the New York Stock Exchange, in American stock exchanges, are now being listed in Hong Kong because even Chinese companies believe that their assets will be better protected in Hong Kong. So I think that sometimes when certain windows are closed, perhaps, or I think that the expression is the other way around, when a door is closed, you can open a window. So yeah, perhaps that could be another way to look at this.
Thank you very much, Joan. Now I'm gonna move to the questions from the audience, but of course, feel free to go back or to jump back to any of the issues that have been raised before. Let's first address a question that has been raised by Sophie. Sophie is asking, to what extent your perceptions or your understanding of China changed when you either moved to China or moved away from China, and how different or how surprising was the media discourse that you were exposed to? So I guess the first question is about your experiences while landing or living in China and the different narratives and images that media tend to portray. Another question, which is connected to this, Ines Arco was thanking you for your insights on gender issues, and she was curious about, and I guess this mostly applies to Chia and Meijie, about your own experiences as women, if you would like to share a few more ideas on how your own perceptions as young women has been changed or has been affected in the past few years. She also makes reference to the specific role of the so-called leftover women in China, and to what extent you're familiar with that issue. Because we have several questions from the audience, may I kindly ask you to be as brief as possible, but of course feel free to use your time to answer the question. So if you want to address any of the two questions or the two of them, it would be great. Let's start this time with Chia, and then we'll move to Meijie and then Joan. Chia.
Hi. So because I've never really lived in China, so again, like this is just my personal views. I think the leftover woman mentioned by Sophie, yeah, it's really, I mean, it's not really just happening in China. I think it's really, you know, like all over East Asia, unfortunately. So the social norms are still there. So basically, if you are, I think in Taiwan, our atmosphere is more liberal. So the situation is okay because I'm almost 30, but I've never really, you know, like facing any pressures from my parents or my peers. But I know for women in China, Japan, and South Korea, this is really a thing, because if you are, you know, if you don't, of course, you can choose to be single and without kids, but it is very likely that you would suffer from some pressure, suffer from pressure from society. So yeah, can I say just something on a human rights discussion we just had? So in response to Meijie, like, yeah, I agree that we should have different understandings of democracy. And I'm not saying that the Western type of democracy is the best, but I think, you know, it's just like variety of capitalism. We should also have variety of democracies. But I think there are still some basic requirements to develop such regimes. So I think, at least for me, the freedom of expression is one of the utmost requirements to achieve this. And I think, yeah, of course, you know, the right to survive, to live like safely is also very important. But I think for China, a country that has already achieved a lot of success to, you know, help its people reduce poverty, maybe it's time to think about other rights. You know, I'm not saying that basic human rights is not important, but maybe it's time to think about other possible rights. So yeah, that's my comment.
Thank you very much, yeah, and I'm sure this will generate reaction by Meijie. Meijie, the floor is yours. Please feel free to comment on the questions that were raised on, or what Chair just mentioned.
Yeah, because Jiang just covered the topic of young women, so I would like to address the first question about when I'm in China and out of China. The first time I left China because I started Spanish in university, so I got the opportunity to go abroad in Valladolid University to have as an exchange student. So that was my first time to I left China. Well, the first expression is like well, it's different because the cultural differences. The expression is like well, European cities are quite small, while Chinese cities are very big, and that's just the difference. I don't feel like there is a jump from third world to the first world. So that's the first time I go abroad, and then second time I started to work for a company. So I went to some Latin American cities, and then I went back to Barcelona to spend to Europe because my PhD. And I think for me, it's this long time. I think I have some reflection is that in some aspect, I think China is taking the lead. So right now, I'm not admiring, or I'm not like I won't think that everything in West is best. So it's just differences. And sometimes you have advantage here in Europe, in the West, and sometimes you have advantage in China. So it's much depend on what you're going to choose. For example, for me and many friends who starting in Europe or starting in Spain, I think we all face a question: is after our graduation, where we're going to work? So it's basically our own choice, and I think it's because I think if China has more opportunity, I would go to China definitely. And if Spain here, I will have more opportunity, I will stay here. So it's basically that. It's not because which one is better than the other way, and it's almost a personal choice. Yeah, that's my answer to the first question.
Joan, would you like to add something to what Thierry and Meijie have already shared with us?
Basically, an observation and perhaps semi-question for Meijie as well. I observed when I was in Zhengzhou, Kaifeng, that there was a big difference from what they were telling me between young women who had studied abroad and young women who hadn't. Generally speaking, my friends who had studied both in Europe or in Latin America, when they came back, were already 24, 25. So the pressure on them to get married was extreme. But at the same time, for them, they were telling me, the men they were finding were not international, hadn't lived the same experiences that they themselves had gone through, and that had become a very big issue for them. So in case Meijie wants to add anything here, I can stop. Otherwise, I can answer the first question.
I think it's a time. I think you'd better answer the first question.
Okay, sure. So basically, in terms of the changes I experienced, or my vision of China has experienced since I first laid foot here, have been unbelievable. I mean, at the very beginning, I would say that even if you have read about it, even if you have studied it, you start from that black and white kind of experience of China from afar. But as soon as you enter and you live there, your opinions keep changing. You start finding challenges that you haven't expected, or develop relationships that make you think in many different ways. So I guess I'd say that my opinions went from black and white to technicolor, like many more perspectives on China nowadays.
Thanks, Joan. Meijie, would you like to add something on what Joan was mentioning before?
Yeah, because I talked about the women role before, and I think what I want to add is that we need to guarantee the women's rights. I think it's very important, and it's a tough task, and well, it's very hard to say, because for me, I don't I have kind of bad experience, because when you go to if you want to work for a company, they sometimes want to hear men, even they don't have that good experience than you. So that problem maybe that could be a bad experience for women right now. But I hope the site and the government can have can improve women's rights and to improve women's roles in the society.
Thank you very much, Meijie. Now I have questions for the three of you. We have a question from Alejandra Peña, who started it at both Meijie and Joan. And what Alejandra is asking is, what is your impression about the recent evolution of Chinese nationalism? Has it increased in recent times? And if so, how would you qualify the impact of this new or rising Chinese nationalism on your daily life? Is there a much more prevalent feeling of pride among the young Chinese, or is this something that is much more subtle but not so obvious in society? And then Atlantic is asking a question for Chair, and what Atlantic is asking is, how strong is the support for independence among the young Taiwanese, or is there still a percentage of the population that would prefer the government of Taipei to become the legitimate government of China, or what would be the preferred choice for the young Taiwanese? So let's, if that's okay with you, let's start with this last question here. What are the prevalent perceptions among the young Taiwanese on the future of the island? And then we'll move to Joan and Meijie on the issue of Chinese nationalism. Jia?
Okay, so this is actually a very complicated issue, but I'll try to, make everything simple, like easier to understand. So I can only speak for my generation. I think for Taiwanese people below 40, I noticed, like, so every year we have a survey on, on our identity issues. I think for a younger generation, over 90%, we actually feel like we are Taiwanese. But this answer is actually a little bit different from the question, because the question is about our support for our governments. But the survey is actually about, identity issues. Because if you look at another survey, it talks about, it's about what kind of political region you would choose. So most Taiwanese people would choose to, like remain like this, remain a status quo. And I think one of the key reasons behind this choice is actually very, it's based on a very irrational calculations, which is that we want to avoid any warfare with China. So most people would say, oh, we want to remain the same. We want to still have the substantial autonomy, and we want to have our regime, but we don't want to, state it publicly, like, hey, we are a country, something like this. So I don't know if this answers your question, but I feel like identity issue and your like political decisions might not be, always correlated. So I think in Taiwan's case, this is like this.
Chair, let's now move to Joan and Meijie on the issue on the rising Chinese nationalism and how this has changed or has had an impact on daily life.
First, okay. Well, because I started this course, so I know how powerful is this course, and I know how powerful is this kind of concept. So the first, I'm not sure the definition of nationalism, because it's kind of, China is kind of, it's like 56 ethnic groups together. So I would say now it's like more patriotic. Young people become more patriotic. For me, it's for me like going outside China is kind of the best patriotic education for me in my life. Why? Because when I was outside of China, I found many articles, news on China are quite biased, and some of them are not fact. They are, some of them even lies. So for me, it's kind of, I become more defended of my country, and sometimes I defend of my the government, because I think the most important thing is unite people, not divide people. Unite. I think the government and the society should work together and not divide them. So for me, I would say that during the pandemic, I myself have changed a lot. I have much more confidence in China's government and in China's future. And yeah, I think I become more patriotic, but I wouldn't say I'm a nationalist. So I don't know, because I don't know the exact definition of nationalism. So I would say the patriotic, yes, but nationalism, I wouldn't say that. Yeah, I don't know the Joan's opinion.
Well, I would start by rephrasing the question, and I would make it plural. Are there more nationalisms in plural than in the past? But I don't know if I'm qualified enough to respond that question. So I will try to respond the question giving a different angle to what you gave. Chinese nationalism has always been there. If you look throughout history, even when the Qing dynasty was there for 300 years, they were still perceived as foreigners. If you look at the rebellions, revolutions at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, they were already quite nationalistic. And when we discuss, generally speaking, like the communist revolution, we tend to forget or downplay the fact that nationalism was already a key component of that movement. In fact, and I came to think of it, I guess, when I read about Chomsky's vision on Vietnam's war, that it was a war for national liberation, even though, again, it was Ho Chi Minh leading it. I opened my eyes to the fact that perhaps China's revolution was already quite nationalistic in many ways. Is it more nationalistic? I don't know how to quantify. Sometimes, especially when there were these demonstrations, against Japanese products like 10, 15 years ago, or against South Korea last year. I think it's obvious that parts of the Chinese society are becoming quite nationalistic. Sometimes when you meet with, professionally speaking, with Chinese counterparts, it's easier to find a certain element of arrogance that perhaps I would have found in my life. I found it more in American or Europeans in the past. So that seems to be a shift. However, you never know what the future holds. Just this week, Xi Jinping has toned down, or says he might tone down the aggressiveness of the so-called wolf warrior diplomats. Perhaps, I was thinking this week, perhaps the wolf warriors were simply a response to Donald Trump, and now that Biden, even if he's using a similar policies, is being more polite, so to speak, perhaps the response should also be more polite as well. Otherwise, it will be out of step, out of tone. So, to what extent the fact that on Twitter, wolf warrior diplomats or Umaos were saying certain things reflects the reality in the Chinese territory is, I think, a question that is very difficult to respond.
Thank you very much, Joan. We are now approaching the end because we promised ourselves that we would not have you or hold you here for more than 90 minutes. Before I close the session, I'd like to give the three of you the opportunity to add something else or to add a final reflection, if you wish, on how you view China. Of course, still no obligation, but in case any of the three of you would like to raise or to share with us a final thought on how they see China, I would very much appreciate it if you can be as brief and succinct as possible, and then I will close the session, of course, thanking the three of you and everyone else for attending. Does any one of you want to add a final thought or a final reflection on the future of China? Chair, Meijie, Joan? Yeah, Joan, go ahead.
Maybe me, just an afterthought. When Chair was discussing about the issue of independence in Taiwan, I was thinking about international media pro-independence or international media protests and Hong Kong. So basically, before the protests or during the protests, you could see that even in service in the US, more people were pro-Hong Kongese independence than Hong Kongers themselves. But that probably has changed during the last 2 years as well. So I think it was important to know that as well. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Joan, Meijie, or Chair, would you like to add some final thoughts? Meijie, go ahead.
Yeah, I have some several words because I found that there are two kind of very interesting theory about China. One is like a threat theory. They try to portray China is like a threat to stable international relations, international order, or threat to the kind of Western liberal democracy. And the other theory is kind of a collapse theory. They think China will collapse someday in future. It kind of China is so how to say, it's vulnerable. They have many political risks, and so they somehow they will collapse. Okay, it's two kind of opposite but interesting theory. I think they don't help us to understand better China. So we need to transform this kind of anxiety into some actions. Some action can help us to understand China better, the reality. So I'm not going to say you need to agree with me, but I have some advice. The first is learn Chinese, so you can know what Chinese people say and think about and go to Chinese cyberspace. And the second is come to China, visit China, no matter as tourist, as a student or businessman. And the third one is make friends with Chinese and to know their real thoughts. So that's my final remarks, and thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting topic and very meaningful talk today. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Meijie. Chair, would you like to add some final ideas before we close?
Yeah, I can add something probably. So just a random thought on patriotism, because as I said, I actually have some Chinese friends. I mean, we are not always like enemies with China. I'm joking. So I realized that during our conversation, some Chinese people, some Chinese youngsters, they are more open-minded to receive criticism because they know that we are not really criticizing the whole China. We are more like criticizing the political regime or just the party, just the government. So I think some Chinese people, sometimes they misunderstand the meaning of patriotism. I mean, you can love China, of course, you can love your homeland, but it doesn't mean that you have to always support, every decision made by your government. So that's my final remark.
Thank you very much, Jia. And before we close this session, this very interesting seminar, let me first of all thank the 3 participants, not only for inviting this risky invitation. Of course, it's not always easy to talk about your own experience, your views from a personal point of view, and I would like to thank them very much also for their honesty. They've been very generous with us, sharing their perceptions, their fears, their concerns, also some criticisms, which I think it's all very valuable for a fruitful and constructive debate. And I hope that by the end of this session, you'll have now a much more plural, polyedric, richer view of the many challenges and the many aspects surrounding contemporary China. We've left out some other questions which were very interesting about misconceptions between China and Taiwan, or how sometimes we get lost in translation and some of the words that are used very commonly in China may be misinterpreted or misconstrued by other people. I'm really sorry because we didn't have the time to address them. And before we close the session, let me remind you that in case you haven't done it yet, you may be interested in having a look at the several articles and works that have been compiled in the IDEES magazine. You can check the website revista idees.cat. And I'd like to thank, of course, all the audience who has followed the seminar from either China or Barcelona or somewhere else. To all of you, have a great weekend. Thank you very much for attending this session. Of course, thank you very much to the participants, IBEI and Centre d'Estudis de Temes Contemporanis. And hopefully see you soon, either talking about China or talking about any other topics that I'm sure will be of your interest. Thank you very much. Have a great day and see you.